but I trusted him. I'm like, well, he's not stealing from me. He wouldn't do that. I know this guy, right? So some of it was my naivety as well, but so it was almost like I was a little bit hurt by it, but I was, in some ways, I guess, Jeremy, I was relieved because I didn't want to have the awkward conversation with someone I was loyal to and trusted to say, hey man, this isn't working out. I don't want to work with you anymore.
Mm.
It's almost like he almost did me a favor by terminating our business relationship because, it sounds in a weird way, but again, trying to put the positive spin on it. How long would I have gone along with it? Probably not much longer, but how much longer would I have gone in? How much more money would I have wasted before I said, okay, I'm going to have to pull the plug on this? He probably saved me some more frustration, potentially some more money.
Welcome to Beyond the Fail, the podcast where we talk to leaders and entrepreneurs about their biggest business failures. We'll deep dive into how they overcame these setbacks, the lessons they learned from them, all to help you gain valuable insights. Failure is an essential part of the business journey, as well as being the key to success. So we're here to show you how to thrive from it. Ken Wentworth, commonly known as Mr Biz, is a 3 times best-selling author, 6 times world record holder, who has been recently featured in US Today as one of the top 5 entrepreneurs to follow in 2024. He started his career at JP Morgan, where he worked his way up to director level and worked there for 22 years, and ended up managing a team of 50 and budgets of an extraordinary $12 billion. He left to become a fractional chief financial officer and has for the last 20 years advised businesses from Fortune 15 companies to startups on financial management and strategy. Today he discusses how he lost $50,000 on a failed marketing campaign with someone he trusted in his network, and how the experience burned him on many fronts. This is Beyond the Fail with Ken Wentworth. Ken, welcome to Beyond the Fail. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. Great. Honored to be here. Been looking forward to this conversation.
Brilliant. Or should I call you Mr Biz? Where did that name come from, just out of interest?
You know what? It's so I have a radio show I've been doing for a long time now, and when I first started the show, we were in the studio, had a guest, and I was walking the guest out of the station, the radio station, and as we were walking down the hallway, he asked me, like three different business related questions, like a marketing question, something about he was having trouble hiring people, and then finance related question. And so we got to the end of the hallway and we're talking, and he's like, man, I feel like I'm talking like Mr. Business here. Like, you know about marketing, you know about hiring, you know about finances. It just so happened that the general manager of the station was walking past at the same time and overheard that. And he said, that's it. You're Mr. Biz. And I'm like, no, I'm not Mr. Biz. And that was the end of the conversation. We all kind of chuckled and we went on our way. About 2 or 3 weeks later, I'm at an event, and someone came up to me. I was having a conversation. Someone kind of entered the conversation. They called me Mr. Biz. I'm like, and I was kind of like, what? There was only, 3 people that the person I was talking to in the general manager station that ever heard it. And that person wasn't one of those 3, right? And I'm like, I said, where did you hear that? And he said, it's all over the radio. I said, what? Well, here the station started to run spots for my show. My show at the time was called BD Radio. Now it's called Mr. Biz Radio. But they started running spots on the station call, and it said BDB Radio featuring Mr. Biz. And so it just kind of took off, and people, I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of flattering. Again, laughed, whatever, and kind of blew it off. And then, fast forward, social media starts to take off, and Mr. Biz this and Mr. Biz that. And then I'm at lunch with an attorney friend of mine, and he said, well, you went through and got that trademark, right? And I'm like, no, I didn't do that. He's like, well, you probably should do that, because otherwise someone else is going to come in and trademark it, and you're going to get a cease and desist letter that you can't use it anymore and everything. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I had to go through the process, and actually did get the trademark and everything. It took a good while, some ups and downs. That was actually originally a business failure. We can talk about that as well. I just thought about that one originally, but that's kind of how it originated, and it just kind of taken off. And I'll tell you, Jeremy, I'm fairly certain that I would guess 50% of the people that I interact with from a business perspective,
Mm.
have no idea that my name is Ken Wentworth. Like, they just know me as Mr. Biz.
Well, that's effective. That's an effective name. So I'm glad you got it trademarked. Um, is that how do you, just out of interest, when you go to events, how do you introduce yourself?
Well, I started to lean into it, especially once I got the trademark. I started to lean into it because, again, people remember it.
Mm.
There's a little bit of pressure along with it, of course, right? I gotta know what the heck I'm talking about. But but so I started to lean into it, and so I just basically now it's like, well, whatever. Call me, just don't call me late for dinner, right? That kind of thing. But it just depends where I'm at. A lot of times we'll say, some people will say Mr. Biz, aka Ken Wentworth. Some people will say Ken Wentworth, also known as Mr. Biz, whatever. But I just kind of leaned into it. Our social media is all Mr. Biz stuff. I own, I don't know, probably 40 related domain names that are Mr. Biz related, just so I kind of protect all the intellectual
Yeah.
property and everything. And funny side note to that you might find humorous, Jeremy. So when I worked in my corporate career at JP Morgan, someone bought the domain name jpmorgansucks.com. And they started to post untrue negative things about JP Morgan on it. Well, JP Morgan found out and ended up settling, let's just say, with this person to buy the domain name from them. Come to find out, it was a 16-year-old boy in the
Wow.
United States. And so I own MrBizSucks.com. I own I just said, no way. I'm like, let me make sure that I don't fall victim to that same sort of scenario. But yeah,
I'd love to see that.
and I just kind of leaned into it.
I'd love to see that. Yes, they're all of the different domain names you've got, negative and positive.
Yeah, for sure.
So where did it start in business for you?
I always wanted to do something business wise. And this is way back when I was, pretty young. I got a little taste of entrepreneurship, when I was, gosh, I guess 10 or so years old. I wanted a computer, and my family, we didn't have much money at all. And I knew my parents couldn't afford to buy it for me. And this was long, long time ago. And I figured out, like, what can I do at that age? Where we lived, it was a very hilly area. And so a lot of people say, oh, well, you can go mow lawns and cut grass or whatever. Well, I couldn't do that because the hills were so steep and everything. My parents were afraid I would get hurt or, hurt myself. I wasn't big and strong enough yet. And so I ended up getting, this will date me a bit, Jeremy, but so does my gray hair. I delivered newspapers. And I figured out, so I played 4 sports, all the way, up through school and everything up until I got into high school. And so I was super busy with sports all the time. So I had a very limited time that I could actually deliver newspapers. So I literally figured out, I did the backwards math and figured out, like, how much for this time I have, and I'm going to deliver papers, and this is how much I'm going to make. Can I get enough to get this computer? I wasn't going to make enough. And so a business lesson. So I'm like, okay, how can I make more? I can get more accounts. Okay. That's not really I can get a little bit of that. And I worked on that, but it was more about, I figured what can I do to serve all my customers better so I could get more tips? That was going to have a much higher return on investment. And so I really did a survey at 10, 11 years old. I did a survey of all my newspaper customers. Just a little paper newspaper. I put it in their newspapers, had them return it to me on, what great customer service looks like. What would you be willing, what would be warrant a higher, tip for me and gratuity, et cetera. And I implemented those things. And some of them were just super simple things that I remember. I had one family that said, it'd be really helpful. And this, you wouldn't think of this in today's day and age for sure, but they were like, when you come deliver the newspaper, don't put it on our porch. Open the door and put it on our dining room table. Because they were older retired people. And they're like, they had some health issues. And so them bending down to pick the newspaper up was, kind of a pain in the neck for them. So I'm like, okay, sure. But yeah, so it started all the way back then, figuring that out. And then, from newspapers, then I got older and stronger and everything. And I could do the cutting the lawns and things like that, mowing lawns. I started doing that and figuring out, man, I really want to do something in business. Went to undergrad, wasn't sure what I wanted to do in business. And so originally my major was business administration, because I thought, I don't know what I want to do. So let me just get a little bit of a feel of everything. Thankfully, I had an internship with a super smart guy, and I was asking him for some advice. And he said, what do you want to do after you graduate? And I said, I don't know yet. I want to do something in business. He said, you can't get a business administration degree. And I thought, what do you mean? I'm going to learn a little bit about everything about business, right? He's like, yeah, that's the problem. You're going to know a little bit about everything, but not enough about any one thing to be able, you're going to know a little about marketing. You're not going to know enough to have a marketing job. You're going to know a little bit about accounting, et cetera. And he said, get an accounting degree. You can use that. That'll help you be a really good base for anything you want to do in business. And it was great advice. I mean, I took my first accounting class. And I'm like, what am I get myself into? Like this, I'm not sure I want to do this. I stayed with it. I'm very thankful for that background. But that's kind of where it all started with, with business, and then getting into that. And thankfully I didn't get, if I'd have got that business administration degree, I probably would have had to go back to school to, take more accounting classes to get an accounting degree and things like that, to be able to, do something after I got out in business. I started originally, my first job out of college was in accounting. I worked in accounting for a couple of years, and I'm like, man, this is way too far in the weeds for me. Like my brain is always thinking, I always tell people I'm like strategic to a fault, Jeremy. So, and what I mean by that is I'm always thinking 3, 5, 10 years out, but it's to a fault, because while I'm so focused on that, sometimes I'll like trip over the curb that's right in front of me, because I'm always focused on things further out. So, but that's kind of where all the business stuff started. And I've always been pretty good at math. And I think, I don't know, I just feel like certain people, you're given certain gifts, and we all have different gifts. And I feel like, that's just one of my gifts. I'm able to look at businesses and figure things out pretty quickly, no matter what kind of business it is. Almost, what are some of the moving parts that aren't working, and how to get them working correctly, and things like that. And, when I originally left my corporate job to become an entrepreneur, I thought, man, is this going to work? Do people want to, am I going to be good at this? And, are people going to be willing to pay me for this? And then I got my first client, and so many eye-opening moments from there that the client's like, oh my gosh, how did you come up with that? And to me, it was like, I'm thinking in my head, well, how did you not come up with that? Like it was, things were pretty obvious to me. And the more I got into that, I could see that, like I said, I think I'm blessed with some gifts as far as being able to quickly determine those things and see those things that I thought that everyone saw those things, and evidently not everyone does. So, but anyway, that's sort of how it all started, and sort of some of the evolution on the business side.
I'm very fascinated by the story of you being 10 and then or 11 and sending a customer survey. That is incredible level of intuition, I would say, business intuition, which in some ways I've never heard before. Somewhat, there's lots of, I've had lots of people on here talking about entrepreneurial ventures at 10 or younger, and they're normally just simple things, selling things, car boot sales, whatever, as you said, mowing lawns. But that level of thinking to do a customer survey in order to try and increase your revenue streams, and then implemented the customer feedback, that's a whole, you could write a whole book essentially just on that principle of essentially the importance of customer feedback, and then using that to grow your business. Where did that come from? Is you any idea?
No. And Jeremy, so again, I think it's just one of those things, like, I guess, I mean, it's hard for me to think all the way back then, but I mean, to me, it was just like, okay, how can I make enough money to get this computer that I want? And again, adding customers, I'm like, I started looking at, okay, how many additional customers would I have to add? And how long is it going to take me to add those? And I have a limited amount of time when I can do this. That wasn't going to be the ROI I needed. I did some of that, right? But I thought, I have to get new customers in the first 2 to 3 weeks to get the revenue from them over the short period of time I could do it. So that really wasn't going to help. And what other ways can I make money selling newspapers, right? Or you're delivering newspapers. And that was just, okay, that gratuities, like that's another aspect to this, how I'm getting compensated. So how could I make more in gratuities? And again, it was just, to me, it was kind of obvious, like, well, there's only a couple of ways that I can go with this. This one's not going to really return quickly enough. This one can start returning like Friday, You know what I mean? Like the next time I collect, this could happen, I could start making money. And so I just thought about it that way. And, even looking back to me, I didn't think much of it, but, to your point, some people, even adults in my life, are like, I remember my parents. Again, this was a long time ago, Jeremy. I didn't just go print. I said there were sheets of paper. I wrote them all out. I hand wrote the notes out, and I think I had 60 some customers. So I wrote out 60 notes with a survey because I didn't have a printer. I didn't have access to a printer back then. So I couldn't just type it out and then print out 60 copies and stick them in. I had to handwrite them all. My dad came in and I was at the dining room table one night. He's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
He's like, that didn't look like homework." He's like, "What's this stack of stuff over here?" And I told him what I was doing. He's like, well, my dad was like, "What? That's crazy." My dad was a, blue collar he worked in a steel mill. He's like, looking back now, he probably was like, "That's genius. Like, why, how would you think to do that?" And by the way, you're going to write out 60 of these things. Like how many 10-year-old kids would say, I'm going to hand write out, especially nowadays, because, people have access to printers and all that stuff. Obviously you can do it much easier. You can create an app and have people, fill it out on an app, make it super easy. But, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I think it was just one of those things that how my mind works, you know what I mean? And I think I was, kind of blessed and gifted with some of that and, just grateful for it.
And discipline as well. You obviously and committed, to write out that just shows that the commitment and discipline you need to be an entrepreneur as well. You mentioned about your parents and, didn't have the money to buy a computer. What kind of, childhood and background did you have?
Yeah, so I grew up in a really small blue collar town. There was a big steel mill in town, and basically, if you were a male, that's what you did. You graduated high school, you worked in the steel mill for whatever 30, 40 years, and you retired. My dad worked there, my grandfather worked there, my uncles worked there. Like that was the career path, and that was kind of I don't want to say expected, but it was just it was a pretty decent job, and you can make a decent living, and and I just, when I would, I think a lot of boys, especially when you're young, at least initially, you probably start to think, "Hey, I want to do what my dad does." And so I thought I'm going to work in a steel mill. And when I think I was in maybe 8th grade or so, and I had been telling my dad that I wanted to work in the steel mill. My dad said, "No, you don't want to do that." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, you work there. Papap works there. All these prominent males in my life." And he snuck me into the mill. Again, I think it was 7th or 8th grade, somewhere around there. And he probably took me to the most unsavory parts, right, of the mill. It was almost like a scared straight kind of thing, right? So he takes me to this part, and they call it a blast furnace, and it was like ungodly hot because it's molten steel, super hot, and there's all these heavy machinery going around and everything. And my dad was like, "How would you like to do that?" Well, at that age, I'm like, that looks kind of cool, And he said, "Okay, do you want to do that for 40 years? Because in your 20s and 30s, the physical job is kind of okay, right? Okay. When you're in your 40s and you've been doing it for 20 years or whatever, it starts to wear on you, and your back hurts every morning when you get up, and this and that. And then when you're in your 50s, and oh, by the way, you're not done yet. You got another 10 or so years before you can retire, probably." He said, "It really wears you down." He said, "You want to get a job that you can work with your brain and not your back if possible." So there's nothing wrong with that. But he said, you can do more than this. Like, you shouldn't limit yourself to just following in everyone else's footsteps to work in the steel mill. And so, my parents encouraged me. Fast forward a couple years, I did really well on some of the initial, standardized testing and all that stuff. I started to get letters from colleges. No one in my family had ever gone to college before. And so, in this literature I'm getting from colleges, it lists how expensive it is, right? And so my dad one night, during the summer, my dad was a night owl. He would stay up super late. And so during the summer when I didn't have school, I'd stay up late with him. We're watching TV, watching sports and everything. He said, "Hey, I want to tell you, I really want you to be able to go to college, but I don't know how we're going to be able to make that happen." He said, "I can see how much these things cost. And like, I can't see a way we can make that work." Well, of course, my parents didn't know about student loans and, all that kind of stuff. And, but the availability of scholarships and grants and all that kind of stuff. So, but I said, "I'll figure it out." I'll figure it out. And I did. I mean, figured out all student loans. I got some scholarships and everything, academic scholarships. I got a little bit of money initially for some sports and things like that, and figured it out. But again, I guess if you look back, that's kind of another one of those scenarios of I need money for a computer, how to figure this out with a paper out. And it was like, well, I want to go to college. Like, you convinced me now I'm not going to work in the steel mill. Okay, fine. Now it looks like I'm going to need to go to college. So how the heck can I afford that? How can I make that happen? And just again, this was a long time ago. So there was no internet back then, so I couldn't go out and just Google like how to afford college. You know what I mean? And again, I haven't anyone in my family that had gone. So I was like trying to figure all that stuff out and navigate those waters, um, to make sure that I can get to, achieve some of the goals I wanted to achieve.
Again, some great foresight from your dad to say you don't want to follow this path. That's quite a brave thing to say, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, as I look back, and even my relatives, even when I started to talk about college, I mean, they knew that I did very well academically. But again, there were other people, I'm sure in my family that did well academically that didn't go to college, right? Even females in my family hadn't. And so I think it was such a foreign concept to them that they're like, good luck with that, big city guy, because that was a big city thing, right? Because when like I said, I lived in a very small town. And, I think initially they were even like that, not discouraging me, but just like thinking that's a daunting task. Like, only rich people get to go to college and you're not rich. So how are you going to figure that out? Sort of thing. But yeah, as you look back, I mean, you think most fathers probably, especially with their male offspring, are like, yeah, I want Junior to do what I do. And yeah, you know what I mean? Let me show you the ropes and all that kind of stuff. But, again, thankfully in further discussions with him, I mean, I think my dad wanted to go to college and probably never did, and probably looked back and regretted that he never pursued it. And so I think that was probably a little bit of the driving force of him sort of pushing me in that direction to say, hey, look, you can do well and you can make more of things using your brain. You've got a brain, let's use it,
Yeah. Obviously, it sounds like he kind of regretted not going to college, as you say. And great for you, because I think that sounds like a pivotal moment in your life that, he pushed you down that path. So fast forward, you said you left JP Morgan or corporate world to go into and start your own business. What was that first business?
The first business was kind of one of the business I still have, and that was being a fractional CFO, business strategist, things like that, which, by the way, I didn't even know what that was. I got out of my undergrad and worked in the corporate world my entire career at JP Morgan. And so I had no idea much about entrepreneurship. I didn't know what I did at 10 years old, 11 years old was considered an entrepreneurial type activity. I didn't know that, any of that stuff. I had never really been exposed to it because I'd been in the, corporate world, all white collar stuff. I mean, I had the blue collar growing up, but then it was all white collar after that. And so, trying to figure all that stuff out. I didn't know, what I want to be when I grow up, so to speak. I got a mentor, and sat down, and it was this amazing activity we went through, Jeremy, that I highly recommend everybody. I mean, I mentor a lot of folks myself, and we go through this activity if they hit the stumbling block and it sounds so obvious when you say it, but we got up, he had a giant whiteboard, very wide, probably 8 or 10 feet wide in one of his conference rooms in his office. And he got on the left side and he said, what's the very first job you had? Tell me 3 things you liked about it, 3 things you didn't like. And so I said, well, I got out of school and I worked in accounting. He said, no. The first time someone paid you to do something. So I said, okay, I delivered newspapers. And so we went through that, and then I mowed lawns, and and we went through, basically the +3, -3 all the way across to the position I currently had at JP Morgan. And then he just stood back, got a different colored marker, and just started circling all the commonalities. And he said, okay, so your next role in your career, we need to find something where you get to do this, this, and this, and you don't have to do this, this, and this.
Interesting.
And I said, okay, well, what the heck is that? What role is that? So he looked at it more from a perspective of, let's not look for like a title, like, oh, you want to be a fill in the blank, a financial analyst, a CFO, or whatever. Let's figure out what you like to do and what really drives you and what you really don't like to do and what role fits that. And that's when he introduced me to the concept of like a fractional or a part-time CFO. And again, it was completely foreign to me. He said, you are CFO for, several businesses. And I said, how do you do that? Because I had been a CFO at JP Morgan. And I'm like, that's a 60 or 70 hour a week job. How do you do that for more than one business? Like, there's only one of me. I can't clone myself. And he said, no, you do it on a part-time basis. You have these businesses that are maybe really good at the widgets they produce or the service they provide, but they're not as good on the business side of things or on the financial side and need some help, but they don't need someone full time. And so it made a lot of sense to me. And so that was my very first business after leaving JP Morgan, going into that. And I found out very quickly, it was a whole new level of career fulfillment. I love my corporate career, nothing bad to say whatsoever, and it allows me to do the things I do now. But I didn't realize there was another level above that I could go with career fulfillment. I was about 2 weeks into my first client, driving home, and it was like the cheesy moment you see like in a movie. I'm driving home and like you could see the sun and you hear, and it's like the flowers and the unicorn, it's like this moment of like, man, I am so blessed that like this isn't even like work for me. I just absolutely love what I do so much. And it was just a moment of like epiphany, clarity of being able to be so thankful that I was able to, kind of find that niche and get into that position. You see so many people nowadays that are like, they hate Mondays. Why do they hate Mondays? Because they hate their job, and I have oftentimes on Sunday evenings, I have trouble going to sleep because I'm excited about what I get to do during the week. I'm excited about, Wednesday, I'm going to meet with so-and-so and we're going to have the strategy meeting about blah, blah, blah. Like, oh man, I'm already starting to come up with some ideas. And it's like, it's one of those valuable things that kind of related to that, Jeremy, I think is very important for people to realize is changing in your vocabulary is have to and get to. Oh, I have to get up to go to work. Oh, I get to get up to go to work. And even if you don't like your job, there's positive aspects to bring out of that. When you say, oh, well, you won't have my job and my job stinks and whatever. Yeah, well, think about the person who's, I hate to be so, direct or maybe I guess a little bit negative, but think about the person who's paralyzed and can't get up to go to work. Think of the person who has a disability who would say, I would love to be able to get up and walk to work. I haven't been able to walk in X number of years. I'm going to be in a wheelchair the rest of my life. I think that changing of the get or have to versus get to, I found not only with my career, but a lot of other things when you start to get, you get frustrated about something. You're like, man, I got to do this and I got to do that. If you change that vocabulary, it really starts to reframe your mind around that. And again, I know I went on a tangent here, but it was kind of related to where, I think, that mindset of that get to versus have to.
Yeah, no, I think it's great advice. Always being intentional about your language, because I think we can often be negative with the language, or it was in a book that I read recently called Unstressable, which is actually a really great book, so I recommend that. I'll put that in the show notes. But he talks about in there about for example, like changing that mindset, as you mentioned, into a more positive mindset of whenever you say something negative, say something positive after, or like reframe it instantly and similar to what you just said, essentially, because we all have a habit of maybe moaning about something, whether it's, I don't know, it's too hot today, or
right.
Oh, it's raining today, or someone, the postman has left the gate open, or whatever it is. But reframing that straight after with something positive. Oh, I'm grateful that the postman has actually delivered my post on time. What a great service, and it's that,
Right.
because, it's very easy to go into that negativity, isn't it? That, I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to hear how it was leaving, I suppose the safety net of our corporate career and going it out on your own, and then going into, smaller businesses, as that, that fractional, CFO, and how that transition was, and what differences you saw, and how you kind of, I suppose, overcame them and coped with them.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge because, and it wasn't nearly as easy as I thought it was going to be. which is very true of most entrepreneurs, I think, have that story. But, once I sort of bought into that concept of, yeah, I could see this is definitely something that a lot of businesses would need. Think of a plumber or electrician who's a master plumber,
Mm.
but doesn't have the business experience or training. And I thought, man, that I could really help a lot of people. And I love doing it. I love doing what I'm doing. I'm going to be helping a ton of businesses, helping a ton of people. A lot of these smaller businesses, family owned, right? So maybe they employ a lot of family members. If that business goes under, that not only has an impact on, the owner, obviously, and his family, but the families of the employees, which may be his, family members, extended family members. So the intrinsic value of that and some of the really appealed to me as well. But, the challenges of getting out. So, of course, I'm a numbers nerd, Jeremy. So I get a spreadsheet out and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to get my first client here and they're going to pay me this much. And I'll get my second client here and third client, fourth client. And, kind of did a forecast. Didn't even come close to being true. I got my first client pretty quickly. And so that's when I thought, this is easy. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. Because again, I was bought into the idea and I understand the value that that can bring to someone who doesn't have that experience, especially after I started working with my first client and seeing the value and some of the changes that I was able to bring. Again, like I alluded to earlier, that I just thought everyone thought that way. And I found out very quickly that they don't. And this guy had been in business for almost 15 years. So it wasn't like this was some brand new startup, young person that doesn't have experience. This guy had been in business for a long time, almost had been successful despite himself. And so some of the changes we were able to make very quickly was like, oh my gosh, he was blown away. And equally myself, I was kind of blown away. Like, oh my gosh, like I'm really making a difference here. And people do need this. And I can provide a valuable service. And so then I thought, oh my gosh, like I'm just gonna have people beating my door down. Like, Ken, please help me. Ken, please help me, Of course that didn't happen. So, definitely some challenges. And, like you said, that safety net, I had worked at JP Morgan for 20 plus years. And so every 2 weeks I'm getting a deposit into my checking account and there's no more deposits coming. So that was a big change. And I knew that was coming. And, I wanted to do, I'd always wanted to do something on my own. Like, when I was in my mid to late 20s, I wanted to do something on my own, but unfortunately I didn't have really the capital and my career had taken off enough to where my income was such that I'm thinking, how do I replace this? I didn't have a bunch of money saved that I could I've got 6 months of runway to figure it out. And so it's like, what job or career can I start? What business can I start where I could quickly replace this income? And it just wasn't going to work. Now, fortunately, when I did leave, later I had some of that backup that I had some capital to have some runway to kind of figure things out. But yeah, those challenges initially. And so again, I was like back to the drawing board. Okay, so what am I doing? How can I attract more clients? Well, how about my current client that we're having absolutely amazing results? Who does he know? A lot of business owners know other business owners. So just asking the question, hey, do you know anyone else that I'm able to help? Oh my gosh. Yes, I'm glad you asked. And he introduced me to people. Getting a testimonial from him. Hey, would you be willing to write me a short testimonial on your experience you've had since we started working together? And then, so building up some of those sort of, I guess, marketing assets and then the 3 people he introduces me to, meeting them. And then, do you know anyone? And kind of just continuing to ask those questions to broaden my network. I had no network. I wasn't on LinkedIn. I wasn't on anything. My network was 260,000 employees at JP Morgan. And, so it was all, new to me. So it's kind of figuring out, navigating those waters and, again, kind of like I did with the paper route, like, what do I do now? Like, what's something else I can do to help more people know about me? So people need to know about me so I can help them. And then maybe they don't need me, but they might know someone else that I can help. So I'm kind of going through that, that process.
That sounds a sort of, I would say, a challenging transition, but it sounds like you may be in the right point in your career to make that, to make that leap. So, sort of focusing in, what would you say is I suppose the most impactful or the biggest failure that you've had in your business career?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch. I mean, thankfully, none have been like massively catastrophic. But I mean, just wasting tens of thousands of dollars on different marketing companies, bringing in a marketing company and all bells and whistles. And anyone who's an entrepreneur, I'm sure, has been approached by some sort of marketing agency, a marketing company, et cetera. And I even had someone that I knew fairly well. I'd known for a few years and seen some of the results. And, again, tens of thousands of dollars with, over $50,000 with a $2,000 return. And then that person basically pulling the plug on me and saying, "Hey, we can't figure it out." And this is a person who'd worked with a lot of prominent, sort of entrepreneurs, names you would know, and your listeners would know and your viewers would know. And I'm like, "So I've invested all this money with you, and then now you're pulling the rug on me? Like, I've stuck with you because you keep telling me, 'Hey, we're gonna figure this out. We're gonna figure this out.' And like, now you're just kind of throwing in the towel," which was, again, kind of a foreign concept to me. Figure it out. And I know this guy's, a good marketer, and it was a failure not only on the financial side of things, but it was a failure in some ways in relationship. When I'd known this person for a while. He'd been on my radio show. Again, I'd known him probably 3 or 4 years before I started working with him. And that to have someone that I thought I knew really well just completely pull the rug out from underneath me and like, "Hey, I give up. Sorry." You know? I didn't expect him to have sort of that mentality. And the only reason I kept pouring money into it was I trusted it. And that's another thing, I think as entrepreneurs, you have to have some trust. And of course you have to take risk. And I thought I was taking a very calculated risk because it was someone I knew. It wasn't just someone who randomly, hit me up on LinkedIn or sent me a random cold email. I thought I was taking a calculated risk. And so it was like really, again, when I see those kind of things though, Jeremy, it's like, the common theme for me is really looking back of, okay, how did I fail here? How did I fail? So what happened that was a failure? I misjudged the trust in the relationship that we had. So how did I do that? Where was my judgment wrong? What can I learn from that in the future? Because, it's not that I'm not going to hire another marketing person. It's next time I hire someone, let's make sure I don't make the same mistake. Right. And so really trying to think about those things and how I fell short on that and how I didn't see maybe some of those early warning signs that I should have seen. And I should have pulled the plug. Maybe I should have pulled the plug on him. But again, I was working on sort of the trust factor and loyalty. I'm big on trust and loyalty, and I had that in him, and evidently he didn't have that in me. So it was a little bit of a painful, lesson.
What were those early warning signs?
Honestly, some of it was the focus on money. His focus on money, and he had an agency, and I could tell he was doing reasonably well. I don't know if he had some, and again, this is one of those things you never know, right? And I tell people this all the time that I mentor, that I work with. Always get things in writing. Always have contracts. Oh, well, this guy's my buddy since I was, we were in grade school. Doesn't matter. You don't know what people are going through in their personal lives, and people that you've known your whole life can get into bad situations. I'm not saying this is what happened with this particular person, but it made me think someone can get into a bad situation where they're in a bad marriage. Maybe they've become an addict of drugs, of gambling, of fill in the blank, that are causing them to make bad decisions in their life that they would have never thought about making before. But now they're behind the 8 ball because of whatever these potential bad things that are happening in their personal life that are, maybe it's embarrassing. They don't want to talk about it, but it's happening. And it puts them behind the 8 ball and causes them to make, very bad decisions that maybe impact you. And it made me think, was that part of it is, cause I could tell I thought he was doing reasonably well with his agency, but he was, even from the very start of us agreeing to work together, it was a lot of as I look back at some of our emails and even some of our conversations, it was a lot of it was money focused. When are you going to pay me? Hey, he sends me an email 2 hours later. He's like, "Hey, I'm not sure if you paid yet. I haven't seen it." I was like, I don't, you haven't done any work for me yet. I'll pay the invoice. I haven't had a chance to get to it yet. And so I didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought it was almost like he's checking in like, "Hey, did it go to spam? I just want to make sure you got it." And so I don't know if there was a money issue there. And, honestly, maybe kind of a little bit took advantage of me because he knew that I trusted him. And so looking for some of those, like, how do you tell that? It's very difficult to be able to tell those things, right? From someone, especially you don't know what's going on in their life. But that was a big part of it. And I started to work with him, and then all of a sudden he was gone, and I never talked to him again. And I was working with other people, and he had told me from the start, because we had a relationship, personal relationship before, and worked together before. He said, I'm your guy. Like I'm going to be the person who runs your campaigns, does the creative, all that kind of stuff. And so he kind of brushed me off, which I thought, okay, he's got a good team, no worries or whatever. But then it was, again, the money stuff. And, I found an instance in which I didn't find right away. And this was when kind of things went south at the end, was where I had paid them money for Facebook campaigns and Facebook ad money, and it hadn't been spent on ads. And I'm like,
Wow.
so where'd that money go? Like, oh, well, yeah, well, you just haven't seen it show up yet. I'm like, okay, well, those campaigns are supposed to start, 2 weeks ago, and they're supposed to be at X dollars per day. And I don't see them. Like, and where's the reporting on that? And so the reporting went south. And so,
So it's slightly fraudulent. That sounds a bit like. It's like,
yeah. And I never got any of that money back. And I wasn't, when we parted ways, I didn't, I wasn't, I was kind of more hurt, I guess, more than anything else. Cause I thought, man, this guy's just pulling the plug on me. And I thought, we had this, we're going to work together here and figure this out. And I wasn't angry. And in some ways, again, I was getting sort of frustrated towards the end anyway of some of these things that were happening, but I trusted him. I'm like, well, he's not stealing from me. He wouldn't do that. I know this guy, right? So some of it was my naivety as well, but, so it was almost like I was a little bit hurt by it, but I was, in some ways, I guess, Jeremy, I was relieved because I didn't want to have the awkward conversation with someone that I was loyal to and trusted to say, hey man, this isn't working out. I don't want to work with you anymore. It's almost like he almost did me a favor by terminating our business relationship because, it sounds in a weird way, but again, trying to put the positive spin on it. How long would I have gone along with it? Probably not much longer, but how much longer would I have gone in? How much more money would I have wasted before I said, okay, I'm going to have to pull the plug on this? He probably saved me some more frustration, potentially some more money. And I think maybe some of it was because he knew that I was hot on the trail and I was kind of starting to figure things out. And he was like, man, I need to cut the cord here before this really turns south. So
did that make you lose any kind of, or doubt yourself a little bit, lose any trust in your process and your intuition? We talked about intuition earlier in a different way, but then this is someone you knew, you said you trusted, but then, it sounded like you got the raw end of the stick a little bit. So yeah, did that knock your confidence a little bit?
It definitely knocked me of saying, I'm not working with anybody for a while. And I think some of that was frustration. And some of that was me also going back and going through that process, as I mentioned, of saying, okay, what did I do wrong here? How could I not make this mistake again? And I honestly, this might sound, maybe this will sound arrogant. I don't think, now looking back, I don't think it really knocked my confidence because I looked at it as, in the intuition game, this was a fail, but I'm, 90 out of 95 here. Still have a really good batting. I'm going to miss some, and I missed this one. I don't miss them consistently. I hadn't missed one in a long time. So I was like, okay, this was a swing and a miss. I struck out. Next time I go up to bat, I'm going to hit a home run because that's what I do. That's what my track record is. And again, not to sound arrogant about it, but I had enough trust, I think, in my history that I hadn't made those errors repeatedly in the past. And if this had been the third or fourth time it had happened in a shorter period of time, absolutely, it would have rocked my world of like, what happened? I used to have this, this innate ability to be able to read people very well. And obviously I missed it and it's gone. So, but yeah, I don't think just because it was that, I almost looked at it as an isolated incident. And as an entrepreneur, failure is part of the game. It is. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how many people you know, how wealthy, how handsome you are. It doesn't matter. You're going to have failures as an entrepreneur. It's part of the game. And so I think I looked at it kind of from a positive perspective of this is one of those failures. And again, what lessons can I learn from it to move forward and not repeat the same mistake?
And why do you think that campaign didn't work? Why didn't it provide you the returns you wanted?
I mean, honestly, I still don't know. Again, that the reason I hired them is that's not in my wheelhouse. I know about marketing to some degree, but I don't know the intricacies of, oh, what's working on Facebook advertising right now? Should it be a short form video? Should it be a long video? Should it be no faces? Should it be, all that? That's why I hired, an agency to do that. That's looking at these things every single day. I don't want to be naive and think I'll figure it out. Like, well, probably not as well as they can from day one. And so again, honestly, I don't know. I wish I knew.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. As you say, you've brought in experts to figure that out for you. And obviously you said you took a 50K hit on that. And did that have any impacts on your business? I mean, that's, it's not a money, the amount of money to be sniffed at. It's quite a significant hit.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely curtailed things. And that was part of it. As we first got started, we had kind of mapped out, the first 90 days, what that looks like. And then we end up spending more, and then we need more in this and more on that. And then we need more creative. And, um, again, I trusted him, and it didn't get beyond, I had set a budget on what I was, I set a budget. I'm a numbers nerd guy. I'm a financial guy. So I set a budget that was going to eat up a big chunk of my budget for the year on what I was willing to spend for that. So it curtailed me from being able to do other things. But I just trusted him to think, like, well, we're going to figure this out. It's just going to take a little bit of time, but we're going to figure it out. And, oh, we got a little bit of a glimpse of some success here. And then, so yeah, it curtailed things that I was able to do, other things that I could have pursued. I mean, lost opportunities potentially of other people that I talked to. And, there were things that I turned down because I had a budget for what I was willing to spend on marketing for the year. And I was going to eat a lot of that up with him. And so I had to turn down other opportunities that maybe would have been fruitful. But I've said, I don't have the budget for that right now. And so, yeah, there's definitely opportunity cost there. And, I mean, surely it would be great to not have had that extra $50,000 in my pocket for sure. But, I looked at it as, as marketing expense. It was a very poorly paid marketing expense, obviously, but, that's part of the business. I run things, very much being a financial guy on ratios and things like that. And so, and I work with clients this way too, is making sure you don't overspend on things like marketing. Like a lot of people ask me, like, what you spend on marketing? Like, marketing should be a percentage of your revenue. So you got to make sure that it doesn't become too big of a percentage. And I think a lot of places start to do that as well. And that's where they get themselves into trouble is, they're spending 30% of their revenue on marketing. It's like, that's not sustainable. Because as that as if you're spending at 30%, your revenue should be going through the roof. You should really be, seeing some great returns from that. But, I look at it as like less on raw dollars and more on like percent of revenue of making sure you kind of keeping your ratios in order so you don't get upside down in different things in that aspect.
And you mentioned about, I suppose, maybe over trusting earlier, and maybe I think you used the word naive about, that relationship and how it broke down and how that campaign didn't work. But what would you say was, aside from that, was there any other kind of big mistake that you made, you felt in hindsight and you would have done differently looking back on that?
Yeah, well, I did make a mistake. I think it's a mistake. I'll find out here shortly as I continue moving forward from that. But um, I decided when I hired them that you do all, that's you. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to give you 100% control of this. Here's what I'm willing to spend, and I'm going to trust that we're going to get results, because I didn't want to be meddling in it. I didn't want to hinder it, frankly. Because again, I feel like I've got a decent feel for things and I know a decent amount of things, but they know infinitely more than me. They're living and breathing this every single day. I'm not. And so I'm going to trust them, and I'm going to give them essentially, full control of all of this. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to sort of get out of all that stuff. And when I, even from my corporate life, as a leader, when I delegate someone, I'm delegating. I don't want to look over your shoulder. If I have to look over your shoulder, then I either shouldn't delegate or you're the wrong person to delegate to. Like, I want to be able to delegate and trust. And so I was trying to use lessons from my corporate life of that. Because when I first became a manager and a leader, I would delegate and then look over someone's shoulder. And by the way, no one likes that. Who likes to have someone looking over their shoulder? That's miserable, right? And so it's not good for employee morale and all that stuff. And so when I finally decided to take this plunge, I said, okay, I'm not looking over their shoulder. I'm going to get the check-ins. I'm going to get the analytics and everything that on a weekly basis. And, I'm going to ask some questions here and there, but I'm not going to go out and say, oh, this campaign, like, why did you use a blue background? Like, I'm not going to do that. Like, they know this better than me. And I think that was me trying to do something that I think personally for me was good. But looking back, I should have been more. And again, a lot was because I had this, I'd known this guy for multiple years. I gave them too much trust and too much leeway. And so I haven't hired another marketing company yet. I will, but I'll definitely be a lot more hands-on, especially in the first 60 to 90 days to see where we're going and to be honestly not as, it's going to sound bad, Jeremy, but not as nice. Like, this is what I'm expecting. And when things are not going well, like, look, we need that. This is the return. We need to start getting on this, or we need to cut the cord and try something different. Like, instead of just saying, okay, I trust you, and keep pouring more money in, is just being more hands-on. And some of that will be, hopefully to get some more of that trust back. But presuming that at the next agency I hire, I will not have a multi-year relationship. Probably it's probably gonna be someone that I, knew that I don't know. I'll definitely approach it from that perspective of a lot more hands-on, especially in the first 60 to 90 days, until we get things hopefully going in the right direction. And again, being more forceful. I was frankly too nice because of the personal relationship we had, and I knew him, and I should have been more demanding on his team of like, hey, you said we were going to have a new creative. That you said we were going to have it by Tuesday. It's Thursday. Like we're 2 days late. Like, what's going on? We missed 2 days of a campaign. Again, I don't want to be a jerk about it, but those sort of things, when you're paying a decent amount, I think you should expect, if you're paying a premium amount, you should expect premium service. And looking back, that's another error that I made, that I sort of just, I was too nice about it and wasn't demanding enough. And again, I don't want to be a pain in the butt customer. I don't want to be the jerk that's always, complaining about this or that, but I also want to make sure I need to hold them more accountable. And so I'll definitely do that, the next time.
Do you think there's a danger of essentially choosing partners or employees in business through that personal relationship side, rather than going out to market and doing a sort of tender exercise or a full set of research and due diligence?
Yeah, 100% for sure. And I'd always avoided that for that reason. And for multiple reasons, the primary reason was, if it doesn't go well, I don't want to lose a friendship over a business transaction or business dealing. And I didn't think as much, honestly. And again, this is part of the lesson. I didn't think that I wouldn't be as hold them as accountable. I think because I didn't think I would need to, because I was relying on the relationship and like, man, I'm going to get like red carpet service here, white glove service, because of the, he and I have worked together before. And I won't have to worry about that. So I hadn't even really, I don't think, considered it. Now I think back on it, like, I'm going to have to like hold these guys to the fire, because of course they're going to be great. They're going to do well for me. But yeah, 100%. I think that's why I try to avoid those things. I don't like to do business with people that have personal relationships for the most part, because again, things can turn south and you don't know, you just don't know how they, it's much easier for someone that you don't know very well to say, this isn't working, we're done, move on. I'm moving on, you move on. Whereas again, I think I poured more money into this with the trusts, and then, based on, knowing them. And that was, obviously a big mistake. I should have held them more accountable. And then maybe this would have come to fruition a lot quicker, that for me to say, okay, this is the fourth time in a row. Like, what's going on here? Like, if this happens again, we're going to have to terminate this relationship. And that didn't happen on my part. And again, that's a lesson I learned from that, is being able to, the accountability. And frankly, the other part is, any agency I hire going forward, as far as accountability goes, is I want them to have some skin in the game. So you're going to make money from me. I want you to have a piece of that pie. If you don't make me money, you're not going to get it. Right. So you have to help me make money, and I'm going to give you part of it back, because that'll give you skin in the game, and you're going to want to produce really good results for me in order, because the better results you produce for me, the more money you make. And so I want to make sure I have that, that type of relationship with the
Would that be like a revenue share or profit share or something?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And honestly, for me, I look at that and I say, if you're not willing to do that, then you're probably not someone I want to work with, because that shows me you don't have confidence in your ability to make a return for me. You're just giving me a bunch of hot air about we can do this and we can do that. And not to say that it's all going to be revenue share. Of course, I'm going to, I recognize I need to pay you for things, right? I'm not saying that it's not 100% revenue share, but I want to make sure, especially after the initial heavy lifting is done, that the lion's share from that point on becomes revenue share. And again, that makes us both rowing the boat in the same direction and making sure that, everything's kosher. I'm putting the money up for the ad spend, but, I need a return on this thing, and I'll share it with you. I don't want all of it. I'll give you some back to you.
No, I think that's a great way of doing that. Those kind of, particularly in marketing, when it is, performance is so key. You mentioned earlier about this, I suppose, approach that you've got, which is, I don't know what we want to call it, like a reflection exercise. You essentially do a retrospective. I've written black box. When you're looking at the black box incident of those failures and those difficult moments. Why do you have that approach?
I honestly learned that in my corporate career. So the very first job I had out of college, I had the worst boss I've ever had. But I learned a lot of things from her. And this is also related to your question now that I think about it. She was a terrible manager, a terrible leader. And I remember talking with my uncle, and I was going to quit my job. I said, I just don't want to work for this lady. She's awful. And he said, you cannot let that woman, you're at a great company, you cannot let her hinder your career there. Suck it up. And what he told me back then was, he said, look, here's the thing. You got to flip the script on this. If she's a bad manager, here's what you can learn from her: how not to treat people when you become a manager. What are some of the things that she does that you look at and you go, oh my gosh, she is an awful leader? He said, that way, when you become a manager, you're going to figure these things out. Like, I'm not going to do that to people. You won't make those same mistakes that she's making now. But one of the other things I learned from her is, I was in accounting at the time, and we, month end was a big part of everything we did. That was crunch time for us. And she called it postmortem. We had a post-mortem meeting after month end was over, and we looked at what went well. Okay, how do we make sure we keep doing that, and all that kind of stuff, and what didn't go well? What were the flaws in the process? What can we do next month to make sure we don't have that same thing occur? And I think I learned that from her back then, even though she was not a good person to work for. Pulling some of those lessons out. And honestly, Jeremy, I might not have gotten that lesson from her if I didn't get that pep talk from my uncle. Because not only would I not been looking for lessons to learn, I probably would have quit my job. I would have found another job and left, and I would have never learned some of those things. And honestly, I do feel like when I did become a manager eventually, just a couple years after that, the lessons I learned from her, I probably did avoid some early mistakes as an early manager that, a lot of early managers probably make that. And she had been managing people for a long time, so there's no excuse for her to still be making those mistakes. But I think it did help accelerate me to being a better manager much faster, because I wasn't making some of those same mistakes that I had seen her make. But again, going back to the whole thing, the mentor thing, like my uncle mentoring me, my dad telling me like, hey, you don't want to work in a mill, and my uncle telling me, learn some lessons from this. Get what you can get from this situation. If she's that bad, figure out what you can learn from her to make sure you don't make the same mistakes. And so I think some of those things being, kind of drilled into me early on was part of it. But yeah, that post-mortem process. And I do that with everything. When I competed in powerlifting, I would look after a meet, how did things go? Even if I did well and broke a world record or something, okay, there had to be some things that didn't go as well as they could have. So let's optimize this process. It was a 95 out of 100. How do we get from 90? How do we get to 96, 97, 98, right? Always continually optimizing that thing. Well, I didn't time my meals right. So, I felt bloated when I started warming up. I ended up still doing well, but man, if I didn't feel bloated when I first started, I would have been, maybe I'd done even better, right? And so just constantly thinking about optimizing the process, not just from a failure, even from successes, doing it even from a success. How could it be more successful? What else could we have done to, continue to raise that bar?
Always looking for those 1% marginal gains.
Yeah.
You said earlier a great phrase, which you said, failure is part of the game. And I think we spoke offline, and I was commenting how there's a very much a different mindset around failure, UK compared to US. What advice would you give to entrepreneurs about how to handle the fear of failure, or how to think about failure?
So there are people that I mentor that I've had to have a very I don't say if awkward, I'll call it, not difficult, conversation with them, because I really feel like, Jeremy, that you have to have the right mindset to be an entrepreneur. If you don't have that right mindset, you will not be a successful entrepreneur. I don't care how great your idea is. It could be some revolutionary idea. If you don't have the wherewithal, the proper wherewithal, you won't be successful unless you bring someone in that has it, and it could influence you enough. And so I've had those conversations with people say, look, you want my honest feedback. I don't think you'd be a successful entrepreneur. I just don't think. And here's why. Boom, boom, boom. And it's that the people that have the tenacity to the proverbial get knocked down 7 times and get up 8, right? The knockdowns are just, that's part of the game. And you have to realize, and I talk, my most recent book, I talk about some of these failures of these people that we deem as successful. Elon Musk, all the failures that Elon Musk has had. I mean, who in the world doesn't know Elon Musk, right? Do you know that 2 out of the first 3 companies that he founded, he got kicked out of? They literally said, we're better without you. Get out now. Like no one, I don't say no one, but hardly anyone knows about those, because now you only hear about the successes. You hear about Tesla, you hear about SpaceX, you don't hear about these failures. Elon Musk think about that. You and I found a company, Jeremy, and it takes off and it's doing really well. And you and other board members come to me and go, you know what, Ken? We're going to be way better without you. Please get out. Think about that. That's a catastrophic failure, right?
Same as Steve Jobs as well, didn't it?
Yeah. Steve Jobs got booted out. Yeah. Howard Schultz at Starbucks, the failures he had. Bill Gates, the failures he had at Microsoft when they were first starting out. There's countless, but most people don't know those backstories because they just know now that they're ultra wealthy and they're, super successful. And oh my gosh, look how well they've done. If they didn't have that wherewithal, SpaceX, I think if I remember correctly, the first 5 rockets, so he starts SpaceX, he wants to colonize Mars eventually, right? The first 5 rockets they launched all exploded. 5. And, as you well know, rockets don't cost $10. It's tens of millions of dollars for each one of these things. Did he say, you know what, I'm just not really good at this? And think about, hey, I want to colonize Mars. I can't even get a freaking rocket into the atmosphere without exploding, right? I'm so far from that goal. It's unbelievable. But he kept going on. He kept going on. Tesla, he's at, countless things. If Elon Musk if he'd have just said it after being kicked out of 2 companies that he co-founded, saying, I'm just not that good. I'm not that smart. I'm going to go be a worker bee. I'll go be a developer. Again, he has that mindset of like, okay, what did I learn from that? Oh, and I've heard him be interviewed about some of those failures. And he said, I was a terrible leader. He said, I learned from those things now. And he goes, I'm still learning, even today. And so I think that's a big part of it, is you have to have that mindset. And if you don't, I just being blunt, you won't be successful as an entrepreneur, because you are going to have failures. Again, I don't care how great the idea, all those good things. You're going to have setbacks. Some of them could be major, right? And could be very damaging. It could be, relationships. It could be financial. It could be whatever. But if you don't have that wherewithal, you're just not going to be successful. And so that's why I encourage entrepreneurship like crazy. But at the same time, I also feel like you need to make sure that you're cut out for it, right? And not everyone's cut out. I'm not cut out to run a bulldozer. I wouldn't be good at it, right? I'd go try it. I might think it's fun. Like people think, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. I don't want to have a boss. You had mentioned before, like, not having a rug pulled out from underneath you. That sounds great. I've heard Dana White, who from the UFC, talk about. He said, everyone talks about wanting to be their own boss, be an entrepreneur. And he's like, 80% of people, you don't. Because, he goes, you do, a lot of people that want to do that because they want to sleep in and they don't want a boss tell them when to get out of bed and go to work and all that stuff. He's like, if you're lazy now, you're going to be lazy working for yourself because you don't have anyone telling you, you got to do these things. And sometimes you got to stay up till 3:00 in the morning to get something done or whatever. But, I think failure is just part of it, and like I said, you mentioned before of, kind of the difference of the thought around, failure and things like that. Again, I think if you're not willing to accept some of that, Mark Cuban, how many companies Mark Cuban's had that have failed? Like he's had, I know, in double digits of companies that have failed. Now he's had, 100 companies that have been successful. Some of the ones are more well-known, but he's had a bunch of other very successful ventures that you just haven't heard of, but he's had a ton of failures as well. It's not, you're not going to bat 1,000 as an entrepreneur. It's almost like, you almost have to think about it like a baseball player. If you're a baseball player and you fail 70% of the time you go up to bat, you're going to be in the Hall of Fame because you're going to bat 300 and that's a Hall of Fame career, right? But you failed 70% of the time. Now, hopefully you're not failing 70% of the time as an entrepreneur, at least in the long run, but you're going to have those. If you don't have that mindset and that wherewithal, you're just not going to be successful long-term. You got to have, and I think I guess to really hone in a little bit more on your question, Jeremy, I don't know that's something you can develop. I think to me at least, I think you either have that or you don't. Like you can tell people and try to coach people like, oh, don't worry about it. If you don't have that ability to brush things off, learn from them, but like put them in the rearview mirror and move forward, I don't know that that's something you can learn. I don't know. I mean, I've got plenty of people. My wife would be a terrible entrepreneur, and she would tell you that because she can't do that. She wouldn't be able to just say, oh, that was a terrible failure. She'd be like, oh, I suck at this. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to go back and get a corporate job. So yeah, I think and it's difficult to tell sometimes with people who have that or not. I think you have to look for, like when I mentor people that I've given that feedback to, like I mentioned earlier, I look at their history. And, as they're telling me about some of their career and their personal lives, is there evidence of times when they just completely gave up? Like didn't even try. And I'm not saying that everything is run your head against the wall. Like sometimes you do have to move on and it's just not going to be a successful venture, but that's okay. But if there's a repeated aspect to that, I mean, even in relationships, I've got a friend who, has been through a lot of different relationships, and he is like one of these guys that I think he goes into a relationship looking for something to go wrong or looking for something in the person he's dating to like, what's wrong with them. And he doesn't try to work anything out. Like you're not going to not have a relationship where you don't have a disagreement occasionally. Right. But you have to work through those things and be able to move forward. So those, mini failures, you got to be able to work through those. Yeah, I think that mindset, I think to me, at least what I've seen, you either have it or you don't.
No, amazing advice. And I love the baseball analogy and the relationship analogy, because I think that's a great way of looking at it. So final question, if you could go back in time and thinking about all those, those failures that we talked about today, and if you could erase them from ever happening, would you take that?
Oh, no. I would not erase them. I mean, some of them were, failures in my life have been painful at the time, but they absolutely they created the success that I have now. Because again, I look at it, I've learned infinitely more. I know, I can't remember if we mentioned this while we were talking or this is offline, but I learned infinitely more from failures than I do from successes. And that's purposeful. And again, as I mentioned before, even when I have successful ventures, I also continually look to improve those. Do I look as hard? No, I don't, because I don't want to waste my time, because I have to focus on this failure that I had. And I want to focus my time on that, right? So I learned a ton more from failures. Failures show you shortcomings. Whether it's a shortcoming in your business, it's shortcoming personally for you, it exposes flaws in your process, in your business, in whatever it is your endeavor you're undertaking. Successes don't do that, especially for a lot of people. It just makes their head bigger, and they, start to, believe the headlines, as they say. And there's nothing wrong with celebrating successes, but I think, being able to, those failures that I've had throughout my life, it's always been, what am I going to learn from this? Yes, I'm going to sit back and whimper for a little bit, and I'm going to lick my wounds a little bit. But then it's like, okay, now how do I make sure this feeling I have right now, that I'm upset, I'm pissed off, whatever it is, I don't want to have this again. So what am I going to learn from this? How am I going to get better? How am I going to try to prevent this from happening? What can I eliminate, that led up to this potentially failure, whatever it is? And again, having that mindset of always learning from, failure's a learning experience. Hopefully you don't have to have too many learning experiences, but especially I think if you learn a lot from those and apply that mindset to a failure of what all can I learn from this, and looking from all different aspects and angles, you won't have as many failures because you're going to shortcut around some of those, because you learned. And the next venture you have, you're like, oh, I learned my lesson back here. I'm not going to do that again, So I think it's extremely important. And I absolutely will not do away with it. A life easily led would be boring. I mean, as much as you say it, it sounds silly to say that, oh man, I want to have setbacks. No, of course you don't invite the setbacks, but if you had everything, if everyone always told you yes, and you got everything you always wanted, you never had any challenges. I know it sounds like utopia, but I really feel like your life would be extremely boring because there's no anticipation of outcome. You always know what the outcome is. Your successes, you wouldn't celebrate, right? The failures help you celebrate the successes. Look how far we've come. Man, we did this, and this, and now look at this mountaintop we've achieved. If you're always on the mountaintop and you never had those failures, you don't know what it's like to be down here. You don't know. This is like, oh, this is a success. This is everyday life.
Perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. We always end on a quick fire round, Ken. So these are short questions and short answers. So question 1, failure is
learning.
What's your life's mission?
My life's mission is, it's going to sound really cheesy, but is to leave the planet a better place than when I got on it. Whether it's in my family, relationships, all over the place, leaving it better than when I got here.
Nice. What's one piece of advice you'd give to people on your deathbed?
Details matter. How you do it, some things is how you do everything. If you're going to put in a half effort on, playing catch with your kid in the backyard, you're going to do that in other things too. Like I call it BITM, BITM, be in the moment. Wherever you're doing, put your focus and your efforts on that. That is critically important. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. It's business. It's playing catch with your kid. It's talking with your parents. It's BITM, be in the moment.
Nice. What's one habit that keeps you resilient?
I guess it's continually making myself do things that I don't necessarily want to do. I think that creates a lot of resiliency. Taking a cold shower, doing cold plunges. I hate them. Can't stand them. Feel better after every single one of them. And I think those little things that you do that you don't want to do, it makes challenges in life become easier, because you look back and you go, hey man, I did this, XYZ, whatever it was, I can easily handle this. And so I've looked back on that tremendously a lot on things that have been challenging, and look back and go, look man, I already did this. Like this thing I'm facing now that seems so daunting, it's nothing compared to this, what I've already done.
Yeah, so true. If you could be immortal and live forever, would you take it, and why?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would. I love life. And I love learning. I love evolving. I would love to continue to evolve forever and adapt to the times and what's going to happen in 100, 200, 300 years from now. That life is going to be so different. Those challenges in life, again, kind of what I alluded to earlier, I think it's what gets you out of bed. At the end of the day, it's what gets you out of bed. And I'd love to do that.
If you could swap places with any other business person in the world, who would it be?
That's a tough one. Honestly, I'd probably say I'd go back to Elon Musk. And I'm a fan of Elon Musk. I'm not like some super fan, or they probably think that because I mentioned him, allude to him a few times. But I feel like the position he's in now, some of the cool stuff he's doing, again, the challenge that he continues to take on in his life, buying X, buying Twitter, the challenge that he's facing with that, especially here now too, and also having the financial freedom to not, if I know what you think I'm going to say, the financial freedom to be able to help people. The guy's got an infinite amount of wealth. If he wants to donate $10 million to help create some schools, he can do that. So yeah, I probably him, just because I see so many of the things he's doing and the challenge that he continues to take on. And it's kind of inspiring to me to see that guy could sit at home and there's, whatever, the next 50 generations of his family would never have to work again. But he's out there doing stuff every day, trying new things, challenging new things, with Starlink and, all these different things. I love that aspect. And I love that he does that and doesn't just say, I'm super wealthy, I don't have to do any of this crap,
Yeah, no, amazing. Ken, where can people find you and connect with you?
Yeah, the easiest way, obviously social media and everything, you can look for Mr. Biz, you'll find me, or just go to mrbiz.com. Everything's there. You can find all the good stuff there, or that too. Yeah.
all the domain names, right?
That's right. For sure.
Great. I'll put that in the show notes. So Ken, thanks so much. We could have spoken for another 2 or so hours. You definitely lived up to the Mr. Biz name today. So yeah, so much wisdom and insight from your career. So really appreciate it. And yeah, I know listeners are going to get a lot of value out of today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Fail. Really hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. Please do subscribe to the show and leave us a review. It really does help us to grow and to reach more people. Do follow us on social media too. We're at Jezwood on Instagram and at Beyond the Fail on YouTube and also on Linktree. Thanks again and see you soon.